here we go. Welcome back to Nick Lenz's Comic Corner, classic, less known classic. This episode number 3251, Doubleshot 3145. I have a trade for Witchblade and the final trade to discuss for Lobster Johnson. First up we have is Witchblade by Marguerite Bennett, Volume 1. Yep, this is the start of Volume 3 for the series. This book collects the first 6 issues of Volume 3. Unlike the previous volume, which featured a complete new character and didn't feel like Witchblade, this one does. Well, for one thing, Sarah is back from the original volume, except this is a rebooted version of the character. They do have basically one of her boyfriends she had from the first volume, Ian Nottingham. He shows up at the end of issue 1. And there's also, by the way, this book collects the first 6 issues of a story called The Darkness is Coming, which I'll talk about that, and a half issue for Witchblade. Yes, just like the first volume, that's pretty much the reason for it. So, basically, she's on the force, and she was put on 2-week suspension, of course. Then we have her soon getting the Witchblade, and of course, we do explain how the heck that happened. And we first open up with Keith Irons. He's this billionaire who is kind of basically the first antagonist of this book, which I think he was the original antagonist of Witchblade when the book started back in the 90s. And then we have these constructions like, oh, we found something, and it's basically this thing it's like a thing that just brace little whatever the spider is, and it affects a woman, and it basically traces its way across the country to New York City. And they mention basically where and we see that apparently her father was murdered by crooked cops, and apparently she in this version was a former servant in the military. Came home, became a fight fellow killers. First partner, basically Michael Lee, and our civilians Nicole Brookside. Yep, so then we come across a safe house, which, like, yeah. And then, of course, basically, yeah, point a gun, and of course, yeah, then we have where, like, he gets beaten up, somebody beaten up, of course. And then the Witchblade, the thing that becomes Witchblade shows up. And then Sarah gets in, becomes the Witchblade on a 2-page spread that I can't exactly turn on its side because of my phone. But yeah, she becomes the Witchblade. By the way, she does not know what this thing is until issue 3. All she knows is just some object that covers her whole body and exposes her belly. And then the issue ends with the debut of Ian Nottingham. Yes, Ian Nottingham. A man who actually once dated Sarah in the previous volume. Yes. So then Sarah, apparently because of this, like, she is basically arrested, given 2-week suspension pending investigation. Yeah, and the guy's, of course, being a massive dick. Now, they didn't have much police corruption in the first volume, but yeah, this one, yeah, there's police corruption. Of course, she puts it on and doesn't have a mask per se, who could hide where she is, and have stuff with Keith and Irons. And then Sarah finishes up with, I think it's her partner, where, like, they presumably had sex, and the cross falls off the wall. And then the kid from earlier comes back, and Sarah deals with the guy. He apparently was like, oh, he's still dead. And she's crying, and then the issue 3, then she cleans it up. She mops up the mess, puts all their remains in all these Tupperware dishes, and then has the Witchblade burn all the remains. And then she gets some self-defense stuff here, and And then we have this IA guy who was basically here because transferred because of repeatedly accused of police brutality his whole precinct. Then we have other members of Department where spoke out and was immediate intimidating silence. She misplaced evidence to gain custody of kids. Never committed a crime but looks the other way. Covered up domestic abuse and sexual violence by a fellow officer. The absolute worst case scenario, he's one of the honest ones like his brother. Fortunately, I know my father's murderer. And then she has this line for her captain. The best dirty cop looks the cleanest, Joe. Yep. And, well, resume. His head, missing his head. The more punctuous. And a 10% increase. So, 12%. That's one of my favorites there, particularly. Suspension over. Go on. Make some noise. Looks like you're cleaning up. Yep. And after hanging out with their partners with the corruption investigation, because they shows out the Witchblade, something she did not do in the original volume. Original volume, she never told hardly anybody. I mean, the only person she told was maybe Ian, but she didn't tell. I think she told later on. She told Gleason, but not. That was much later, not early on. She didn't have much allies. And then, of course, she meets up with Ian. And this is where he finds out about it being called a Witchblade. And little fun fact, I had read issue 3, and then I fell behind in comics, because I've been behind in comics for the past year. Because of all the anime and also culture, I don't get to read new comics. So, then recently I sat down and read all the recent issues afterwards, basically 8 issues, which was no problem to get through. So in issue 4, in a place called The Keep, Ian trains Sarah how to use a Witchblade. And no, she does not fall for him because she thinks he's a dick. Yep, and fights other stuff. Of course, she fights Irons later on. Yep, and she continues the training here. Yep. Fights more creatures here. Ian deals with whatever, and then it's like, since they weren't hungry, anything else needed for you? Yep. And then, of course, basically Keith does his own thing. Yeah. So apparently her partners doesn't know about Ian, but he's been training her to use it, and they kind of basically go to study this other creatures, to this dark stuff. And apparently she doesn't know about Keith Irons. And now we have basically the debut in this universe of Jackie Estacado, aka The Darkness. Yep, this is the first appearance of the rebooted version of the character. And then we have the 1/2 issue where it feels like we see like a cave woman version of the Witchblade. And then we see like various different people who've had the Witchblade over the years. So kind of in a way, this is the half issue. This is their take on Tales of the Witchblade. And the book ends with a different woman, basically, with something else going on here. But unlike in the case of the previous volume, this book had a great start. We have Witchblade, which is awesome. I give the book roughly a 10 out of 10. Next up, basically, we have is the second and final omnibus for Lobster Johnson. Yep. And this, of course, basically contains the following stories. Contains Chain Thorns in Life, The Forgotten Man, the Glass Mantis, Garden Bones, Makiko, Metal Monsters of Midtown, The Pirate's Ghost, Iron Prometheus, and Killer My Skull. Yes, that's literally what these issues are named. The story's name, anyways. As for what issues they cover, fine. Okay, so the Iron Prometheus is the first 5 issues of the book. Let's see. The Forgotten Man, this issue 23. Chain Forge in Life is actually 21. The Glass Mantis is 22. Makiko is actually the final issue of the series. Metal Monsters of Midtown, that's 24-25. The Pirate's Ghost, 28-30. Iron Prometheus, the first 5 issues. Killer My Skull. This is... Oh yeah, Garden Bones is 27. Yes, but what about Killer My Skull? Let's see. Oh, it's a short story from Hellboy Box Full of Evil. Yep, basically it's printed in the first trade for Lobster Johnson, along with trades 5 and 6. The Middle Monsters of Midtown is basically Lobster versus basically robots in New York City, which is a really amazing story. Oh, by the way, Mike Mignola is he basically does all the issues of this book. The Iron Prometheus he writes by himself. He does the cover for that story arc. Burning. Well, let's see. For Chain Forge in Life, he writes it with John Arcani. Cover artwork by Tonisa Zunji, who does pretty much all the cover artwork here, including the tier artwork for the Pirate's Ghost. So, yeah, basically it's like some one-shot issues, a couple of story arcs. So, start out with a Chain Forge in Life, also known as The Empty Chair. This is a standalone story focused on Christmas time. Yep, it's a Christmas issue. And they put this first for reasons. They also in here some old serials where Mike Mignola took inspiration from Lobster Johnson, where apparently no one knows who he is. And they apparently basically fought crime from 1935 to 1938. So pre-World War II. Yes. The Forgotten Man basically... Excuse me. Where basically this is Lobster Johnson vending homeless people in Hooverville. Hooverville, those of you not familiar with that, Hooverville was a cardboard city in Central Park, where they call it that because they didn't like Herbert Hoover, who was elected the height of the Great Depression. Basically, not long after he was elected, the stock market crashed. And the way the U.S. got out of the Great Depression was mobilization of World War II. Yes. So, the Hooverville thing was basically defiance of the fact we had a president who apparently couldn't help the economy at that point. Also, apparently the whole war was going with this at this point in time in the 30s. And they fight these monsters, and by the end of it, this is basically a paper about the heroes of Hooverville. As for the Glass Mantis, this is basically something to do with Egyptian stuff. Which, I love the tier artwork here. It's awesome. Which basically more hero pulp stuff. Yeah, and of course deal with, well, try to rob the Egyptian Museum in New York City. It's a great issue. Garden of Bones. This is another standalone issue for the book. Yep, lots of standalone issues, plus a couple storks. This is mostly about you have to shoot a graveyard, a lot of good spot, basically a lot of good pulp stuff for this one. This is just an amazing story. Mangito, the final issue of the series, which they put this before the opening story arc, which is weird. Maybe it's set before the events of the... Because basically it's set out of order. So this is basically another trip to Chinatown. With Onis. Actually more like Japanese people, yes. I think this is possibly... Excuse me. I believe this is basically a lot of to do with Japanese villains. Yes. And then we have, well, the Midtown Monster Manhattan, basically the robots. I mentioned this already. It's basically what Lobster does throughout this 3-part story arc. Also, this really cool cover here. We have Lobster swimming down below the Hudson River to get into a car. Now, this felt like an epic story, like in the case of Get Lobster. Yes, that's what this thing felt like. And keeping this only 3-parter, yes, only 3 parts. Not bad. And then we have the Pirate's Ghost, which is basically, well, dealing with pirates. And a character who thinks he's basically... yeah, you have Lobster Johnson basically working with a guy who thinks he's Doc Savage. Yeah. And the whole thing is Lobster Johnson versus pirates, like pirates from the golden age of piracy, who have returned to the 1930s, basically about 300 years after they were all executed for piracy. But excellent story this one is. Yeah, this is amazing. And then we have Marguerite. This is the one that kicked off the series. Why they put this after a lot of everything else, I don't know. Maybe because a lot of the stories take place before this one. It's possible. The Iron Prometheus basically is just about Lobster's team up with basically a guy in a suit who I think is Sledgehammer. Yes, I think it's Sledgehammer, and he gets a spin-off book. This is basically like, even though it's his first story arc, it's basically deals with Sledgehammer, who becomes Sledgehammer 44. Sledgehammer 44 is literally just Mike's version of Iron Man. That's basically what it is. And here's basically what I mean by where it's like truly inspired by old Western pulps with this particular page here. Yeah, this does a couple times throughout this Iron Prometheus stuff, but this book is awesome. Loved it. I give Lobster's Omnibus a 10 out of 10. Final thoughts on the Lobster Johnson series. The thing with this particular series is that the first issue, well, the first story release, was released from September 5th, 2007, concluded in January of 2008. And then, this is really weird, the next issue doesn't come out until 4 years later. Why in the world Mike Bennett waited 4 years? I don't know. That's basically what he did. Where that was from January to May of 2012. And then they continued publishing issues for a couple more issues in 2012, with 11 and 12 released the same year. And then about several months later, we have 13, 14, 15. And then a few months later, we have the Get Lobster story arc, which I think that's where I caught up with that. That's when kind of when I started reading, was right after that one. I did read that one. Then we had Change for Origin Life, which came out like about a year later. And then we had another one released a few months later. Then in 2016, we had The Forgotten Man, Midtown Monster Midtown. And then we had like 2 one-shot issues and a 3-part story arc. And can you believe the last issue was released for this back in 2017? As for why Mike stopped, I don't know. I have no idea. I've never met the guy, so... But with the case of that, Lobster Johnson's done. And with me currently, well, I'm still reviewing Witchfinder. Frankenstein is going to come really soon. He's another. He has like roughly a few story arcs basically. And I think that they've been collecting like about 3 different trades. So he's going to be something basically come and cover really soon. He's going to be really quick. Yes, there's also Young Hellboy. There's other canon stuff like I mentioned, Sledgehammer 44. Yeah, a bunch of other ones I'm going to cover. But that's going to place Witchfinders, basically the spin-off stuff. Yep. But in the case of Lobster Johnson, with this finished up, I'm placing with Godzilla. Yep. But when I finish the last year of Witchblade, which is going to be, I know across it with Spawn, but then I'm placing that with Star Trek. Yep. But yeah, this particular review. Please like, comment, subscribe, turn notifications. Next up, possibly Apothecaries or our last two of the Rise in the World. Okay, let's go. Bye.